Welcome to The Longer Game, the only show that's dedicated to the future of retail. We bring on real-life people in the retail industry. We talk about their experiences, we share their stories, we apply it to what's currently going on in the market, and we look towards the future of retail. You could say it's retail reimagined. My name is Michael Marr. I run a customized, done-for-you service agency called Cartology that helps brands win on Amazon. Now, while my expertise stems in the Amazon field, we bring on a wide array of guests because retail is expansive. You've got e-commerce. Yes, you've got marketplaces like Amazon. You've also got brick and mortar that is evolving. You've got logistics. You've got technology, finance. There are so many aspects to retail, and it's complicated. So we're here to bring you the entire story. Do you think that you have an interesting story and you'd like to tell it on the podcast? Then go to thelongergame.com and fill out a form to be a guest on the show today. You can catch The Longer Game on any social channels: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and our website, thelongergame.com. We've got all awesome guests on this show, so that I will promise. Are you ready to hear more about the future of retail? Let's get down to business. Welcome, everybody, to The Longer Game, the podcast where we talk all about retail. We go deep, we stay shallow, we talk about in-store, we talk about e-commerce, we talk about all the things that would be a part of the retail ecosystem, and we always have a guest on to talk about their experience. And today we have Chris Peterson, who is the author of Red and Blue Customers, super interesting book from the conversation that we talked about. He's also the co-founder of LifeMind, which is an AI agent platform for marketers. I'm going to let him tell you about that because he's probably going to do a way better job than I could. So welcome, Chris. Tell us a little bit more about you and about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's been kind of an interesting journey. Like I've spent decades in marketing, working with startups, DTC brands. I founded and sold a couple of digital marketing agencies. And throughout that whole period, I've been super interested in human insight, consumer insight. And I always want to know why people buy what they buy, because ultimately that's what marketing is about. You got to know why someone wants to buy something. And so back in 2020, I came across some research from Pew that allowed liberal and conservative people to tell each other what they wanted the other side to know about themselves. And it was an open-ended question, which was really rare for research. So Pew published hundreds of responses to this thing. And it was fascinating. I read through them. And what struck me was that here were two groups of people who had two different visions of the world. How could this not affect what they buy? And
Sure.
because I'd seen some anecdotal articles about, the two different groups buying different things, but there really wasn't much about it. So I dove in and researched it and came across some super interesting information, which turned into the book. And then the book actually led into the business, which, effectively uses AI to bring the personal values of customers to life so that a brand can align their products better with the target audience and to create a better fit. And the liberal and conservative viewpoint is just one dimension of that at LifeMind, together with generation and region. So that's kind of the quick story behind the thing.
I love the layers that you're talking about. Like, yes, your political views or the social views, but then across generations, across regions, like all that stuff will not totally change, but it will certainly adjust people's viewpoints, and maybe something for someone that lives in the North is not as much of an issue for someone that lives in the South, which is why I think people choose to even live in individual states, because this state, as a part of our republic in the US at least, maybe this grouping of people has different interests, which is why we make laws in this state versus on the federal level. But you said something that is so simple, but it's probably easy to get missed, which is how people view the world will likely impact them as a consumer. And that's
Yes.
kind of like a yeah, well, duh, of course it does. But I don't think we often think about that as brands or as marketers. I think we're probably more thinking okay, what is the problem that I'm helping to solve? But like that's a how do they view the world will change and impact how they view maybe a problem and how they react to that problem. So it's a little bit layered deeper, but it's kind of a no brainer, but I just don't think people are thinking about that.
Well, and that's exactly the point. It's as I dove into researching the book, the big light bulb that went off in my head was that I've been thinking about markets and customers wrong for decades, which was, a little humbling. And it's and what I discovered is you've got to go through a transformation that you kind of just described, which is as marketers, we look at our audiences, our customers, our markets from the outside in. We look at things under a microscope. We look at, is through the proverbial one-way mirror to understand
Yeah.
our customers. What we don't do is turn that around 180 degrees, look through the eyes of the customer at your business through the lens of their personal values, okay? Because that is what shapes so much of what they buy. And if you don't think, I mean, all you have to do is get in a car and drive a couple hours, no matter where you live, right? I mean, depending on where you live, but let's say you live in a city, you drive 3 hours outside the city, you're going to feel like you're in a very different place,
Oh, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so why do you feel like you're in a different place? Well, you see people driving different cars, wearing different clothes, living in different kinds of homes, going to different restaurants. Those are all things people buy. Okay.
Yeah.
But the impression that that makes on you is like, wow, this doesn't feel like home. Or you're in an airport, right? And there's this mess of people all around you, and you look around and you're like, wow, some of these people really seem odd. And of course, they're saying the same thing
This
about
yeah,
you.
this person seems really really odd. Well, that's like an exposure thing too, is like the more you interact with a certain type of person, and it could be gender or race or political affiliation, whatever it is, that it's really hard to, let me say it this way, when you don't interact with certain people, it's really easy to put them in a box. And that could be, oh, this person's just a hillbilly or a redneck, whatever. They don't know anything. And then when you start to interact with them, you're like, oh, like they're a human being. That adds a different element, and it's a lot harder to dehumanize them in a way, which I mean, I don't think we should be doing, but it's easier to do that when you don't know them. So that exposure can have a really, really big impact. Of course, negative exposure could also be like you interact with someone, you have a lot of negative experiences. That can impact how you look and think about people. But even just from a space standpoint, I think about being in a big city, everything's close together, living in the country, or a couple of hours outside a big city, so much more space. Like that's a big, even if you don't think about the people, like that's a big change in environment.
Yeah, it's huge. And two things on that front. One is at work, even with a lot of people working remotely, at work, we tend to be around people more like us than are different from us. And in our own research, just as one example, we have found that marketers are 67% liberal. Salespeople are 68% conservative, and that's one way to explain why the two groups don't always get along.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um,
There's probably a lot more, but maybe that's a good start.
yeah, but there's this notion of, when you evaluate marketing, the strategies, the audience, the customers, and you conceive of your market, okay, you tend to use a mental model that is your own and probably a little similar to the people you work with. And so, what this approach really implies is stepping outside of yourself and looking through the eyes of customers who are very different from you. And to your point, there's actually research that shows that if you aren't familiar with somebody, you tend to be a little bit negative about them until you get to know them. And what's so fascinating is in the United States, it's when you look at region, worldview as liberal and conservative, and a generation, you end up with all kinds of smaller markets that together add up to the national market.
Yeah.
So it might feel like, oh, this is something you do for local marketing, but it's actually not, because if you look at your own consumers, if you your own customers, you can identify, for example, if they skew more liberal or conservative. And very few companies ask that question, like, are my customers more liberal or conservative?
Why do you think they
And
don't do like you mean they don't ask it internally or they don't ask it
yeah,
other consumers? Do you think it's like a I'm worried about offending somebody?
yeah,
Okay, yeah. That's what it
yeah. Well,
feels like.
there's two reasons really. One is I mean they're both interesting. One is that the two groups as markets, okay, have effectively snapped into place over the last 20 years. They've been forming since about the 1950s. But in the last 20, 25 years with digital media, they've actually really clarified. And you if you get away from political terms like independent and you just focus on worldview as conservative or liberal, and
Yeah.
certainly moderate, there are moderates in that mix. Well, then you've got two really big markets, both with roughly equal spending power, because liberal customers actually have higher income, but they also have higher cost of living. Conservative customers, 20% lower income on average, but they have a higher rate of homes paid off, lower mortgages,
Mm.
lower cost of food. And when you net all that out, they're two incredible markets. And so
And that
one
can
reason is
affect how you create products if you know that there's maybe higher higher disposable income versus someone who maybe is more if we're going to look at it from like fiscal responsibility, like you mean homes paid off, things like that, whatever the case might be, that would make a big impact on just how you, even if you have a certain product set and then you find out, oh, my customers were liberal versus conservative. Well, that's going to change maybe how I develop this next thing compared to if they lean more conservative.
that's right. I mean, it's absolutely true. And when you ask the question, like, if we go back to like, so the two markets have snapped into place. And then to your point, it feels like politics when you talk about liberal and conservative. But it doesn't have to be, because actually the book that I wrote and all the work in this topic has nothing to do with politics, if you can believe that. It has to do with the personal values that the groups hold and how they see the world. And there's a way to approach it that is non-judgmental. It's all, to grow business and thrive, to evaluate in a very dispassionate way who your customers are, and then looking at the different value sets. And in the book, I outlined 27 different values, 20 that distinguish the two groups and seven that unite. And the values are, it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with things like self-moderation, self-image, how they think about the future, influences, visual styles, exploration, and change boundary. These are all, they're just different orientations to certain types of values. And all with the goal to make a product fit better with a customer. And to your point, it can come back to how you even think about developing a product. But you first have to ask, are my customers and my market more liberal or conservative? Because there's no such thing as 50-50. I've looked at, I don't know how many customer databases now on this front and evaluated markets. There's no such thing as a 50-50 customer split, liberal and conservative. The closest I ever saw it come was about I think 58, to like 42. But we recently worked with two companies at LifeMine where one brand was overwhelmingly liberal customers, one was overwhelmingly conservative customers. And I don't mean they're far left or far right, they're just liberal or conservative.
Well,
And
I think if you take a step back from that, like when you think about the ideas of liberal and conservative, you're right. I don't see those necessarily as specifically political, but they certainly get ascribed to that. But like conservative could just mean, hey, I'm more used to doing things the way that I've been doing them. Where liberals like, hey, I'm willing to maybe try something new. And of course, there's you said you have 27 values that you look at, 20 that separate, 7 that unite. So like looking at that those words in that way, I think helps even just change your perspective of how you approach this. And don't I think there's just been a tendency to over politicize things because everybody wants to be the first to share the news. Everybody wants to get views and reactions, and it's like there's this heightened sense of everything's crazy all the time. And I think my guess is that even in those liberal and conservative camps, more people are probably in the moderate camp, but maybe lean more one way.
Yeah, well, and the fact is, marketing people skew very liberal. I happen to be one of them, and now I look back on decades of evaluating creative strategies, target audiences, and consumer personas, and all kinds of things. I'm like, you know what? I can think of a number of times I projected my own values onto decisions I made about products, marketing, communications, media choices. I mean, this like people think of Fox News and CNN or MSNBC. It's like, oh, well, those are liberal and conservative. Well, it extends to almost every medium. So, as an example, the TV shows Modern Family, Doctor Who, and Outlander are watched almost exclusively by liberal customers, and New Amsterdam, Chicago Fire, and The Good Doctor watched almost exclusively by conservative customers. But I challenge anyone to find a media planner who thought about liberal or conservative, what are our customers in terms of buying ad space, you know, for those kind of shows or others. I mean, there's no the one TV show that comes closest to having an even split is the Super Bowl,
Oh,
and it's one and
I love
it
that. That's so funny.
well, it's the one reason. This is the reason the NFL is so immensely popular because it actually appeals to liberals and conservatives almost equally. And when you find a product, think of the Super Bowl as a product. When you find a product that can appeal to both, the scalability is much bigger. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be successful with one market or the other. If each of those two markets was a country, they'd be the 10th largest in the world. So you don't have to worry about appealing to both. Now, if you're a retailer with physical stores, okay, you got to be careful with your retail footprint and where those stores are and what you're communicating. And there are obviously retail chains that get into trouble when they communicate, maybe a little bit overtly more liberal or conservative, and their customers, might actually boycott something.
When you said you as a marketer ascribed your own values to these consumer decisions, where that could be all well and good, they could be good values, but if it's not engaging your customer base more, then it's hurting you. And then maybe you ask the question, okay, well, is this the customer base we want? Do we want to start, changing customer bases, which is fine, but you then also alienate this original customer base. And can you even pick up? You've proven a model that works with the current customer base. Can you even pick up that other customer base? So I love that. And then even thinking about like a retail footprint, if my audience is, or my, consumers are more conservative, where are they going to be? Where should I go and look for those people? Like all that stuff makes a big impact, but we start to ascribe our values to the consumer because we look at it as a I'm right versus wrong, as opposed to your way of like non-judgmental, like, okay, well, someone views this way about this issue, and this other person views this way about this issue. What does our customer base say? Okay, do we feel good about making this decision that aligns with our customer base? But it doesn't have to be a good versus evil conversation always. It could just be
Exactly.
two different viewpoints. I mean, I think there are like
Exactly.
some absolute evils, like murder, probably not very good. I think most people would probably agree on that as well. But like just thinking about it in that way is a game changer.
Yeah, it is. And what it does is it can give you a tailwind or create a headwind. Okay.
Okay.
And let's face it, marketing is hard.
Yeah.
Okay. There's
You said it.
nothing easy. There is nothing easy about marketing. Okay. And so everything you can do to give yourself a bit of a tailwind,
Mm.
and these ideas around looking at worldview and even the distinct regions and generations and looking through the personal values, it doesn't have to cost you anything. It's a strategy decision, right? It's not a media buy. It's not something you have to invest in. It's basically asking the question, in a different way. Like everyone asks, who are my customers? And you might get some demographics back and some basic stuff. And oh, they're likely to buy this kind of product or something like that. But the question is rarely answered through the lens of personal values. And a starting point for that is really looking at liberal and conservative, because I think a lot of brands are surprised when they actually look at the result. And sometimes their own database software can give them that answer like in a minute if you just answer that question, because customer database software is often sold to political campaigns. And so in that, there are reports sitting there that you can probably run. Yeah, yeah, and I've seen like one of my favorite anecdotes was I looked at the database report from it was a women's shoe brand. Okay, and they sold through e-commerce and had three retail stores, and the retail stores were in San Francisco, Seattle, and New York City. And and when I looked at the database report, there was a summary profile on the report that said, oh, it's females this age, they have this income, they have these interests. But then down in the bottom corner of this report, which wasn't even included in the summary, was they actually skewed quite heavily conservative. Okay.
Wow. And
And
they were not
and so
expecting that, I'm sure.
no, no, it was counterintuitive, but there was something in that product that was pulling through conservative women to buy more than liberal
They
women,
were
even
targeting
though,
salespeople. That's what it was. Because what did you say?
yeah,
68% of salespeople are conservative. Is that what you said?
yeah, that's right. They're
Okay.
all female salespeople.
I love it. I
But
love it.
no, but to me, and some brands might look at that and go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with that. It feels kind of weird. It feels political. It is such an opportunity, quite honestly. As soon as you answer that first question, what are my customers? Believe me, the things you can do to align better with your market just start flowing, you know. And it's just when you look at the values and I want to point out kind of an X factor in all of this, which is fascinating, which is when you look at your market and customers through the lens of worldview, liberal and conservative, you cannot help but learn more about the other side, whatever side that is. Okay. It doesn't matter if you're liberal learning about conservatives or conservatively learning about liberals. When you do that, that other side becomes less crazy. They become more familiar, and you look at it. And I've got readers who have told me they've said, "Oh wow, yeah, this is just different ways of looking at the world." And they tell me they've kind of achieved calm from that, believe it or not. And they can kind of see through the headlines much better now, even though there's no politics in the topic at all. But you cannot, if again, through the objective of business growth, to learn about both groups. I mean, what better excuse to learn more about the two groups, right, than to drive business growth?
Yeah, well, and Pete, you said that like that's a big opportunity because people just aren't willing to touch it, right? They're worried that it's political, that there's some kind of problem. Like that is an opportunity waiting to knock if you are willing to explore it and take that non-judgmental approach and non-judgmental way.
Yeah, I mean, and in the beginning, my business partner and I at LifeMind, we were worried about this, right? Like to take this idea to brands and say, hey, we look through a lens of liberal and conservative, and are people just going to kind of tense up and not want to deal with it? And we have found quite the opposite. We have found people find it fascinating. It's a new insight that they haven't seen, and it's something that has great implications for how you talk to a customer, how you target a customer. Because you talked about being in a city versus being outside of a city. Well, liberal and conservative, correlates roughly to population density. I mean, cities are liberal. You get outside, you get beyond the core suburbs, and it's more conservative. The suburbs are really kind of a mix of the two. And so the targeting of the two different groups is super straightforward and easy. Okay. And it becomes a layer. All of this becomes a layer of insights and targeting on top of what you already know today. It doesn't replace anything. It becomes a new layer of insight that you can take advantage of to do some testing and to see if you can create a much stronger tailwind for the business.
I like what you said about creating headwinds or tailwinds. And if you now have that data and that insight, why would you not want to give yourself a tailwind, unless you are unwilling to look at it in a non-judgmental way. The other way of saying that is unless you want to look at it in a judgmental way and then ascribe good or evil to those specific viewpoints.
That's exactly right. I mean, we recognize that there are some marketers, some brands that are not going to want to think about a market that is not their worldview. Okay. Now, but even for those brands, like let's say you have a liberal founding of a brand and the team is more liberal, they're in New York City or wherever. Well, okay, you can double down on that and say, okay, let's target liberals more proactively. Let's look at the values that liberals hold, and that can actually shape communications even more. It's probably happening already kind of naturally, but you can actually amplify it without it being political in a way that fits with a liberal audience even tighter. Now, we haven't come across companies that want to do that, quite honestly. Most businesses we talk to, they want to grow their business in general. They want to know where the opportunity is, and they find it fascinating when they actually look at the values and insights around the two groups because it feels like something you can use like right away in order to shape how you're talking to your customers.
Yeah. Are they scared? Are they scared that something bad's going to happen? Like, why does it feel like they're unwilling to go and dive deep and better understand?
Well, I mean, it is that notion of like it feels like politics, right? And I think, but once people get just beyond the surface level of the topic, right, the immediate reaction is kind of like feels like politics. But you dive just an inch deeper and you're like, oh, this isn't what I thought. This is actually stuff that we can use. I get this. Like if you just take, you know, a value around, like you brought this up before, we call it in the book change boundaries, right? So liberal customers, they have wider change bound, and this all comes from research. By all the values come from research in social psychology, social anthropology, and cultural geography. I didn't make any of this stuff up. There are hundreds of research studies out there that I used and cited in the book
Okay.
for all these values. So liberal customers, wider change values, wider change boundaries, linked to the desire to experiment. You even hit on it earlier on in our conversation. More conservative customers, change boundaries are more restricted. New ideas must be proven first. And that is such an interesting twist to that, right? It's not that conservative customers aren't going to try something new. They just want to make sure that it's proven first and that it's reliable, and then they will adopt it,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah.
And so if a product, it's almost like, I mean, I think one of the things I mentioned in the book is that liberal customers almost become like a filter for products for conservative customers.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's like the two groups are complementary. Like
Mm.
if you're successful with early adopter liberal customers, and you're able to then adjust how you talk to the market to bring in conservative customers. Once your product is proven, none of this can save a bad product. Okay, I mean nothing can save a bad
Okay, I
product.
like that you said that because a lot of people don't know that.
Oh my God, yeah. This is all. Well, first of all, this kind of strategy will help give you your best shot with a product. Let me put it that way. And because if you don't do this right, like if you actually do this contrary, like for some reason you end up marketing to conservative customers with a brand new, innovative, disruptive product, you're probably not going to sell much, right? And in that case, you're going to take what's possibly a good product and make it fail. But what's interesting is how the two groups are actually complementary in business. Sales and marketing people are complementary in business, and the markets themselves are. So if you can just shove the headlines aside for just a minute, you actually see two worldviews that are both interesting, and you'll always align yourself with one or the other. And none of this will make you more liberal or more conservative or switch sides. It just helps you recognize how other people think and how your market thinks and how your customers think.
I love that. When we talked originally, there was a before we ever recorded. I said there was a great book that I read called The Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell is certainly more conservative, but he wrote this book to explain how people view the world. And there was the constrained view and the unconstrained view of the world. And the summary of those two things are, the unconstrained view of the world is, we need to make sure that the world is perfect and everything is exactly as it needs to be. Whereas the constrained view is, the world's broken, we can't please everyone, we have to do the best that we can with what we have. And when you start to understand worldviews, I think you then have better conversations because you understand, okay, I see how this person views the world in this way. Maybe trying to get them to agree with my point of view isn't going to help. Maybe I find out more about why they believe that specific thing, and that can help me to have more fruitful conversations. At least that's like the takeaway that I got from it. Like that's a game changer. Just knowing how people look at the world and then reacting accordingly, instead of ascribing like, oh, they don't believe what I believe, so now I have to do whatever to get them to believe that, and making it more scary than it really needs to be.
Yeah, and you hit on another big topic, which is, like you said, more fruitful conversations come from a non-judgmental, kind of dispassionate evaluation of the situation, similar to, I think, how you're describing the book. And it's a fundamental. It's also a fundamental recognition that the world, and the United States in particular, is pluralistic. Okay, it's made up of hundreds of different groups of people, and this goes back to original immigration, and where people came from, and then the evolution of liberalism and conservatism as people went to big cities for economic opportunity, and the second industrial revolution and the shaping of those two worldviews. It's it's a recognition that I have my own worldview and that others have others. And so if I can put aside me being right or wrong, if I can, I realize some people aren't going to want to do that, but if I can put aside that I'm right or wrong, it opens up the opportunity for far greater human understanding and far greater understanding of your customers and your markets through a lens of personal values, if you can step outside of yourself for a few minutes. And that's something in marketing. I mean, I wish I knew this decades ago, but better late than never, right? And I like I said, there's so many times where I think I put my personal worldview stamp on decisions, right? And it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just human nature. But if you recognize it and you understand how different groups think, then it's not difficult to achieve greater fit with this kind of thinking.
If you can step outside yourself,
Yes.
that's the biggest thing. You're your own worst enemy sometimes. You are
Yes.
the barrier to getting deeper knowledge and understanding.
That's right. That's right. And it goes back to just how we function as marketers. It's like we build up this body of knowledge, and again, it goes back to like the customers, they're always behind this one-way mirror, you know, and we're trying to figure out how to make our product work for them, from our perspective, and how do we push it into their lives, rather than asking the question, how do they see our brand? How do they see our business? How do they view our product as one of these pluralistic groups? What values are they ascribing to my product that are shaping whether or not it's a fit, right? And when you run analysis on, if you run analysis on your customer database just to figure out even just where people are, right, just purely geographic, well, you always have customers skewing in all sorts of different areas. It's never a representation of the United States. And the reason for that, now it could be, because of, I don't know, the seasons and things, and, different parts of the country will, need different things. But more often than not, it's because of personal values combining, worldview, geography, and generation.
And you talked about this a little bit, like the U.S. is pluralistic. because there's so many different types and kinds of people. You go to like a Sweden, you're going to have a lot more homogenous needs, a lot more homogenous views, likely because there's more similarity in that. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying it's the reality of a similar group of people living in one, one specific area or geography. But even in those pluralistic groups, not every group is a monolith. So you start to look at a group of people and say, oh, well, this person tends to be, to skew this way. Well, maybe they don't, though. But you're making a judgment call based on certain demographical information, the way they look, the amount of money they have, all those things. And that, again, causes you to miss this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you brought up, the South earlier in our conversation.
Yeah.
And if you look at marketing maps, there's always like the South or the Southeast, right? Well, like when we developed our own map through personal values, like we basically threw aside, states completely, and we looked at where do different value groups exist based on original immigration using a concept called the effective first settlement, which is the original immigrants in any given area of the United States put a cultural and personal value imprint on that area that remains today. Like hundreds of years later, it is still there. And books have been written about this. It's been studied by cultural geographers. It's a fascinating topic. But if you look at the South, it's not just one group. You've got what we call the European South, which is really the white South. You've got the African American South. You've got what we call Caribbean tip, which is the Miami area, and also up around Tampa. And then you have the French South, which is the area around New Orleans.
Yeah.
And if you, and we have we have this map on our website, but if you drive from, one of those regions to the next and to the next, you'll feel like you're on a different planet, And again, it goes back to, why do you feel that way? Well, it's the stuff people are buying, right? And if we were all perfectly rational human beings, which we all think we are, then we would all buy the same stuff, and we don't. And every marketer knows that they can't sell their products to everybody. And yet there's these personal values that really come into the mix. Now, obviously, there are going to be great products that just do extremely well. And that's fine. But this is where you can really help propel a product like that by giving it an even better tailwind when a product works really well.
Love it. Give yourself some tailwinds, people. Quit creating your own headwinds. This has been super interesting, Chris. I appreciate you going deep with us here on this. If people want to know more about what you're doing, where should they look? Behind the one-way mirror, or is there a better place that they could maybe find you?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions about this, first of all, there's the book, Red and Blue Customers. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble if you want to dive deeper on that. You can take a look at what we're up to at lifemind.ai, which is bringing all these ideas to life using AI, using values encoded into 41,000 zip codes, and then using AI to bring it to life in marketing with targeting and creative content. We're launching soon, but you can see an early iteration of it there. And if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through the contact form on lifemind.ai. I'd love to hear from people.
I love it. I'd highly encourage everyone to reach out to Chris, and maybe just a little PSA. Get to know your neighbor. Maybe don't just judge them, or maybe go somewhere else and get to know someone else's neighbor, because maybe you're around more people that are like you.
Take a road trip.
Take a road trip. There we go. And we will end with that. See you guys later. All right, that was the show. What did you think? That was the longer game. We would love for you to share the show with other people and to leave us a review of the show. So go to iTunes, go to Spotify, you can go to YouTube, comment, leave a review, and share this on any social channels that you are active on and wherever you have influence. We want to share this story and stories like it to as many people as possible. Do you have a compelling story and do you want to come on the podcast and talk about it, and you're in the retail industry? Then go to thelongergame.com, fill out a form, and we will contact you about coming on the show. You can find us on any social channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you can go to our website, thelongergame.com, to actually read all of these episodes in blog form in text because we know not everyone's going to listen. This podcast is brought to you by my agency, Cartology. We are a customized, done-for-you service agency that helps brands win on Amazon. It is super complex selling on the Amazon Marketplace. We help simplify that for you. This podcast is also brought to you by Podcastify Me. They are a full-service podcast production company that designs podcasts around people who are paid for their advice. That is coaches. If you want someone to help create, strategize, and distribute your podcast to the masses, go to podcastify.me to find out more. I've so enjoyed that you've been a part of the conversation and that you've given of your time to hear these people's stories. We'd love for you to share. If you want to find out more, just go to thelongergame.com. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay blessed. And until next time, cheers.